Hi everyone, welcome. I think that we can start now. I would like to welcome you in one of the series of events that we organize. My name is Nikos Panagiot. I'm head of DCN Global. Digital Communication Network Global is an organization with global enrichment and which is supported from the Citizens Exchanges Office of State Department, who would like to thank. We are working a lot on issues of disinformation, while recently we have launched a major campaign in multiple countries across the Europe and above regarding Humans for Ukraine. It is a major campaign that you can reach and actually share it in order to promote and share the word about human stories of everyday citizens. We want actually to promote a citizen's view, and your contribution is vital. This community wanted to show its support on the Ukrainian people struggle, and we have organized a series of events on a topic regarding disinformation that we have worked extensively. Today, I will be actually the discussion together with the Aisha Sures, and which is the members of the board as well as journalists. And together with us, we have the following speakers whom I would like to ask them to present themselves. The first one is Roman Osaduk. Roman.
Hi everyone, my name is Roman Osaduk. I'm research associate at Digital Forensic Research Lab. I'm glad to be here today.
Thank you, Roman. Olga.
Hello, I'm Olga Tokaryuk. I'm an independent journalist. I'm currently based in Western Ukraine. I'm working with many foreign outlets, and I'm also a disinformation researcher and a non-resident fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis.
Thank you. Olena.
Hi everyone, I'm fact checker and editor at the Ukrainian fact-checking organization stopfake.org.
Thank you, Elena, as well. I would like to remind you that you can actually place any questions that you want to address to the speakers regarding on the chat room, and your participations matter to us because it's part of actually of this discussion. I would like to start by asking the following question. War in Ukraine and invasion in Ukraine. What is the role of information, and what especially is the role of social media in information and disinformation? Roman?
Okay, I might start. So the role of disinformation is of social media and disinformation there is pretty vital as of now. We see different patterns that are unveiling basically in real time. So Russia is using pretty old tricks and strategies that they've done for 8 years and even more. Basically, I don't know, there were like a few campaigns where people over TikTok tried to criticize Ukrainian refugees in Moldova, or actually criticize refugees in Poland via Instagram. Or we saw that they basically created a new thing that wasn't pretty extensive before, is that they weaponized debunking of information. So basically they stated a body that kind of debunks false information or fakes by Ukrainian side. But the only thing that they're doing is that most of the time they basically fabricating information themselves, present that it was fabricated by Ukrainian side, and then debunk it. They also portrayed some Russian prisoners of war as Ukrainians being like that. So there is a wide-scale usage of social to portray their point of view on the war, and trying to portray this as this I don't know, and trying to prove they are doing nothing wrong. Again, if you open up, let's say, the news feed, absolutely parallel world that is actually not touching reality at all, and I guess my colleagues will agree with that, and basically amplify that. It is pretty crazy out there. Another interesting thing that we use is that Russian officials using social media as weapons. So like Russian embassies elsewhere, like anywhere in the world, and disinformation. Oh, I guess there are some problems with audio,
Roman,
right?
yes, exactly. If yes, thank you, Marek.
Yeah, is it better right now?
Yeah, yes, it is.
Without the video, awesome. Then I'll be without video. Sorry about that. So yeah, Russian embassies everywhere in the world are also like promoting those disinformation and false debunks. And yeah, that's another interesting thing, that official sources are also being used in this disinformation spreading. So I'll stop there to give a floor to my colleagues.
Thank you, Roman. Olga?
Well, I can speak mostly from the perspective of a journalist. This war has been quite difficult to cover for journalists, and we are seeing that in 20 days of war, there are already several journalists who have lost their lives in this war. And just before we started this event, news came in that other two journalists, an American camera, were killed in Horenka near Kyiv, and the journalist is currently in the hospital. Several days ago, another American journalist died. So it's civilians on journalists targeting indiscriminately, without any respect to rules of law, to rules of war, without any respect to the fact that journalists work there. They are clearly marked as press. They are wearing helmets. They are wearing protective vests. And despite that, Russians are shooting and are targeting journalists. And it looks like they are doing that deliberately. So this war is, it's very difficult to cover it because of these dangers. And I also know from my Ukrainian colleagues who are on the front lines that they were also subjected to shelling, to Russian shelling. Their car was shot. In particular, my colleagues from Hromadske were shot at in Zaporizhia region, in Enerhodar, when they were trying to cover the situation with a nuclear power plant that was occupied by Russian forces there. So journalists are taking enormous work, is so important and so precious and so crucial, because very often the only information that we get is coming from journalists. And here I'm speaking about Mariupol, for example, the city on the Azov Sea that has been besieged by Russian troops for more than 2 weeks, the city where hundreds of thousands of civilians are stranded without electricity, without heating, without drinking water, and without any access to food supplies and medicine. And basically the only information we get from Mariupol is thanks to two Associated Press photographers of Ukrainian origins, Stislav Chernov and Yevgeny Maloletka. They publish photos and they publish video footage from Mariupol that gives us at least a sort of understanding about what is happening there. They sometimes also write texts to describe the situation. And the case in point that is related to their work in Mariupol and is related to disinformation as well, that I would like to mention, this is the case I covered as a journalist as well. is that of a pregnant woman in Mariupol, Mariana. Maybe some of you have heard about this story.
We all heard, yes. We
all heard of this story. Who was pictured on the photos of the bombed hospital in Mariupol last week, on the photos by these two Associated Press photographers. And then the Russian embassies on Twitter in several countries, in the UK and also in other countries, they launched a smear campaign against this woman, saying that, well, she was wearing makeup, that she wasn't real, she wasn't really pregnant. This was like all a staged story, that in fact the hospital was a base of Ukrainian nationalists of Azov battalion, and that's why it was targeted as a military object, not as actually confirmed that this woman in the photo was in fact pregnant. On her Instagram profile, there were photos of her pregnant, and there was a new footage and new video and new photos a day after the bombing, or 2 days after the bombing, that actually showed that she gave birth to a baby girl, and so like she was indeed pregnant. I spoke to her relatives also. I wrote an article about that for the Daily Beast. And her relatives, they also sent me photos of her, like confirming that she was indeed pregnant, and that they are their relative. They are her relatives. And they told also this story about her, like how she went to this hospital because several days before, like she was about to give birth, because she was afraid that she might happen under Russian bombing or shelling, and she would be unable to reach the hospital when she was due to give birth. So that's why she was there several days before she was about to give birth. And her husband was able, despite the very difficult conditions in Mariupol, despite the fact that mobile connection there is not functioning, basically, her husband was able to call for a couple of seconds to these relatives to inform them that she gave birth to a baby. But despite like the fact that it was completely kind of debunked this fake story of Russian officials that this woman is, like, they are still pushing these lies, they are pushing this propaganda. I think that one of like the most important outcomes of this war in terms of disinformation so far is that propaganda and disinformation is so blatant, it's so kind of big, the lies are so big that somehow like it's hard to believe that they can be lying, on such a huge scale. And I think it's a part of a deliberate strategy. Like the bigger is the lie, the more is the probability that some people will believe it, because they would think, well, it's impossible that it's a lie because it's so huge, so it should be at least like partly truth. And it's also part of Russia's strategy to, distort the reality and to confuse with the audience with so many different versions of truth, as they say. So people eventually kind of are lost in this fog of. So that's my take, and then I will give the floor now to my colleagues.
Thank you, Olga. Olena, do you think that these disinformation tactics are failing because of the presence of journalists on the field and the extended coverage of truth? Olena?
Thank you. I'm turning off the video because we have air alarm now, and I just go away from the window. It's hard to say this Russian disinformation is failing, because like last surveys in Russia, we saw that more than 70% of Russians still support this war. And we saw all this hate from usual Russians, from Russian relatives who just wrote that it's okay that somebody come to our country and trying to kill us. But I want to say about Russian disinformation and how it changed in this war, because it's not 20 days of war, actually, it's 8 years and 20 days of this full entrance of Russia to Ukraine, and we in this war for 8 years already. And now, and I want to say from perspective as a fact checker that we now we see the same level of fake news as it was in 2014, and actually Russia didn't change this its strategy. They actually use all these outrageous, clear lie about everything that is going on here. It's so-called war operation, and
we can understand your emotions, Olena, and I think that all of us that are here present can fully understand the difficult position that you are. We want actually to tell you that we support you with whatever means and whatever way we can. And we think that this type of events, along with the campaigns that we launched, aim actually to publicize and address this invasion and actually expose the truth to the rest of the people. Roman?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just want to add also that what has changed, the level of aggression, it become more sorry.
More violent.
Yeah, it's absolutely more violent, and even couldn't believe that somebody could lie about that, like how Olga said about the situation with a person with this pregnant girl. It was shocked that somebody, even journalists in Russia who we think that they had critical thinking, they also trying to questioning this story and trying to find what was why it was fake but not real story. So yeah, it's really more aggressive now, and a lot of hate speech also mixing with disinformation. So yeah, it's now more harder to work with it than it was in 2014. But again, the strategy is the same.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Olena, for this actually approach. Michael, you want to ask a question? And then I'll go to that.
Yes, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Mike Kakouris. I've been in the information technology sector for over 40 years as a businessman, an executive. I was also for a couple of years an NCO in the Greek Special Forces, and currently I'm a member of the digital transformation team of New Democracy, which is the ruling party. And since we ran some campaigns in 2019 where we had to face a similar problem with misinformation and fake news and all these things with social media, we're running campaigns for politicians, actually, me and my associates. I wanted to ask all the guys, anyone can answer, the Russia propaganda, is it rooted so deep in other European countries or neighboring countries like Poland or Latvia, whatever, but mainly in the West, what we call the former West, the same as it is here in Greece? Because in Greece it's pretty bad and it's been going on for a very long time. Okay, and you see now that we have people from the extreme left and the extreme right converging, supporting Russia and sharing and publicizing and trying to circulate all kinds of fake news from Russia.
Thank you, Michalis, for the question. I will pass the floor now to Roman. We will keep the question in order to see the disinformation landscape across Europe. But let's emphasize some aspects regarding on the ground, because we just have heard how difficult the times Olena has, and then let's move to the wider perspective that you mentioned regarding the disinformation in Europe and the need to address it. Roman, in a relation with the previous wars or actually efforts of disinformation that DFR-LAD have started, do you think that Russia intensified their efforts, and if they did, on what way and in what countries? Roman?
Yeah, sure. So they, I would say that they followed their usual footsteps as they done before, right? So they use a lot of different versions of the same events. So they use the same tropes they use with the MH17, Skripal poisoning, and Navalny poisoning when they try to launch as many versions of the same event as possible to make people confused and stop critically thinking about what happened, simply because they would just, people would stop and say that it's too hard to understand what is happening there. I will not take any side because I don't know what actually happened. So these tropes are kind of similar. However, there are some new tactics. Like before, we never seen, as my colleague said, this blatant and open lies used by official bodies and people with some kind of critical thinking, as was previously taught. So when the official bodies and officials in Russia blatantly lie and amplify disinformation, it's not explicitly new, right? It was even before, but now the extent of it is just enormous. And if we're talking about what are the countries that they are aiming most at, I would say that Russia has like a long history of funding political parties and political movements in Europe specifically. And also they try to focus their influence over Russian-speaking diasporas in different countries, especially in Europe. Not only the neighboring one, like the Baltic states, Ukraine, Poland, and some other countries, but also in European countries. You probably have seen these videos of protests in some German city in support of Russians and against Germany taking refuge for providing refuge for Ukrainian refugees. So I would say that the main target audience is the Russian-speaking population, because regular audiences, right, like in any countries, they have their own media landscape. And let's say Russia today is not extremely successful into penetrating this view and understanding of the media landscape of each country. They have some extent of influence, right, especially within groups that are against mainstream, in air quotes, views on the events. But again, it's mostly on the Russian-speaking audiences. But again, maybe my colleagues will add up on this.
Thank you, Roman. Olga? And the question relates with what actually Michael.
Yes, I would like to speak about the disinformation.
Yes, please.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to address the disinformation that it's targeting international audiences, because that's also my main focus of research as a disinformation researcher. I've been working on a project together with a company called Mythos Labs in the months leading up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We were monitoring the activity of suspicious accounts on Twitter, of the accounts that were spreading pro-Russian disinformation about Ukraine and about, the Russian military buildup on Ukrainian borders. And we noticed that many of, the messaging was directed, and the most of the messaging was directed at international audiences. So targeting audiences mostly in English-speaking countries, such as the US, the UK, but also in other big countries such as like France, Germany, Italy, and also Turkey and India. And very often, you know, the messaging, the goal of these messages was to undermine support for Ukraine. So what they are doing, they're spreading different sorts of disinformation about Ukraine. But the main goal is to undermine the unity in the West about providing support to Ukraine. And to some extent, these efforts have been successful. Now, you mentioned that in Greece, far-right and far-left parties are very often spreading Russian disinformation about Ukraine. This is, again, not a new phenomenon. I'm not very familiar with the, you know, the situation in Greece because I do not speak the language, but I know very well the situation in Italy. I speak Italian, and, you know, I was investigating also the impact and the Russian disinformation in Italy since 2014, disinformation related to Ukraine. And I noticed that, yes, if we're talking about the political actors, very often the parties on the extreme, you know, fringes, both extreme left and extreme right, they are very keen in somehow justifying Russia's aggressive actions in its, you know, in the neighboring countries, like the war in Ukraine or war in Georgia, or Russia's actions in the war in Syria. They use different sets of justifications. So far left very often describes it as some sort of anti-imperialist struggle. They, you know, they have very deeply entrenched anti-Americanist feeling, anti-NATO feeling, which somehow allows them to justify all Russia's actions with, you know, this prejudice towards what America and NATO does. And on the far right, they have like different set of narratives, but again, like spreading, you know, justifying Russia's actions and spreading a lot of fakes and disinformation about Ukraine. This is about the political level. But very often that also, I don't know, like if you agree with me, if you see that in Greece too, you can see that in the media as well, in Italy, even now, even, you know, after Putin launched his invasion of Ukraine on February 24, and basically it's kind of clear that Russia is committing a lot of war crimes, targeting civilians deliberately, and, you know, like doing unimaginable hostilities and atrocities in Ukraine. There are still personalities on mainstream Italian media, on television especially, who are advocating that Ukraine should surrender in order to bring peace. You know, they are again saying that America is bad and the fault for this situation is not, okay, they are saying, well, we do not endorse Putin, but then they say something that actually indicates that they endorse him, or at least they try to justify him, you know. So it's not always, you know, just like blatant lies or blatant fakes. Very often it's disinformation, or it's highlighting and manipulating the information in such a way that it only supports one policy as a journalist, is that Ukrainian agency and that Ukrainian voices and the desires of Ukrainian people are missing from the debate. I don't know if that's the case in Greece, but that's certainly the case in Italy. You know, a lot of experts or so-called experts on geopolitics who have never been to Ukraine, they don't know Ukrainians, like they do not, very often they don't even speak neither Ukrainian nor Russian language. They are on TV speaking about some big power struggle, but absolutely denying the right of Ukrainians to, you know, want to live in a democratic country, in a free country, and have a better future for their children. So I don't know if that answers your question. I'm just, you know, shared my observations about the context that I know better. That is it.
Thank you. Thank you, Lena. Michael, I think that it answers your question. Thank you,
Yes,
Michael.
Thank you very much for your answer. We are on the same page, and it's even worse here in Greece. That's another story.
Thank you. Olena, how important it is actually to promote these human stories of everyday people in order as a tool to combat disinformation? How important it is actually to project this everyday suffering, or not only suffering, but also optimism or courage or fight of people in order to combat disinformation. Olena?
Yeah, I think that this question is better to address to Olga, and she could ask from journalist perspective. Because yeah, I think it's important, but as for us, for example, as for checkers, now for us it's more important to promote clear facts about what's going on here. Of course, emotions are very important. For example, yesterday it was really like not interesting story, but very
Important, let's say.
Important story with this editor that came out on so-called live air on Russian television with this poster that she against war, no war. And now the story is on the first pages on the whole different Western media. Yeah, and but and I really was shocked that a lot of Europeans, they call this editor a hero and discuss how brave she was. And we understand that all this story was like just simple information operation. And that there is no live air on Russian television at all, and clearly it was staged for some reason. But a lot of people buy it, and I see, for example, in my newsfeed, a lot of compassion to this girl, a lot of compliments, and so on. So yeah, for me as fact checker, now, it's more important to promote like clear facts, but not emotions, because of these emotions we could buy the story like this one.
We have a question, a comment from Mitchell actually, that says that people that he has spoken in Estonia insist there is still live TV news in Russia.
I'm sorry, once again, I didn't.
Mitchell pointed out that people that he spoke in Estonia insist that there is still live TV news in Russia.
Okay. Maybe this people think about, you could just remember a story, maybe you heard about it, for example, when it was Olympic Games in Sochi. Yeah, and it was maybe my colleagues could explain better. They show this show of opening of Olympic Games and show how 5 rings open like as a symbol of Olympic Games. And it was a problem with the fifth ring, and it couldn't open. And the whole world saw that this fifth rings didn't open, and Russians didn't saw that everything was open and everything was working well. So it's just like one example that there is no live air on Russian TV, and like a lot of my colleagues, like experts, prove that there is no live air. And also a lot of different other elements in this story points out that it was staged. Like for example, different videos of people who shooting this live air, sitting at home with their cell phones. Also, it's very weird. You didn't shooting your TV, your news, your TV with your phone, sitting and watching news. So, but suddenly when this story came up, a lot of videos with this girl also came up. So a lot of elements show that it was like just information operation to switch attention of Western world to like Russians who don't want this war. But I
Thank
just
you.
saw results of social surveys and they show exactly opposite.
Okay, thank you, Elena. Roman, how do you see social media providers' policy or help to silence and expose Putin's propaganda machine?
That's a great question. So they basically have slightly different approaches, right? So let's say Twitter started actively flagging any government-affiliated media. So when you share news from the Kremlin-affiliated or like state-affiliated media in Russia, it will just show you some kind of disclaimer that this is Russia, like government-linked agency, and you should be careful about it. So this is just like one approach. Another approach is there was by Facebook as well. They also flagged such content, but they also looked for some inauthentic coordinated behavior that is usually could be found on their platform. So they define it as something when some pages or entities try to conceal their identities and pose themselves as somebody or someone that they are clearly not. So they cleared up of a few networks to try to amplify different messages, including the network of local cities pages in Poland that worked for at least a year or two, just publishing local news, and then at some point automatically starting criticizing Ukrainian refugees and Ukraine itself. So this is in another approach. YouTube started blocking some outlets from its platform in different countries. So approaches are different. They were pretty effective at some point. As of now, we cannot tell which ones were like the most effective, especially considering that many platforms as of now blocked inside Russia, right? Specifically, so it's hard to evaluate long-term results and their effectiveness. So I don't know, only in a few months or maybe years we could tell which ones were like the most effective, because there is no consensus among scientists whether which ones are the most effective, or which measures are the most effective. Definitely blocking some content and deplatforming propagandists are pretty effective. But again, we should countermeasure it, whether when they switch to other platforms, are they still influential or not. So I guess it's pretty effective what platforms done in their own respect. Could be done more, yes, for sure. And the effectiveness is really hard to measure as of now, so we'll see only later.
Thank you, Roman. Olga, do you think that this war coverage it's different from other wars in terms of that journalists managed to be in place and managed to correspond differently? And as a result, they addressed issues of disinformation.
Well, I think I partly mentioned that before. I think that, well, you know, it's very difficult to compare because I don't have a direct experience of other wars, right? As a journalist, I haven't covered like other wars. But what I think is remarkable about this war is about how dangerous it is for journalists to cover it. And the fact that, as I said, in 20 days of war, already 3 journalists have been killed, journalists who are wearing recognition marks, you know, who are clearly marked as journalists. still they have been targeted, which seems that they were targeted deliberately by the Russian troops. This is something I think very scary and very dangerous. And my fear is that it might discourage other journalists from, coming to cover this war, because well, if some of the most experienced journalists, because these American journalists who were killed, they had big experience of working in different conflict zones, and still, they lost their lives here. So they knew like all the precautions, they were taking all the precautions, they knew how to move, how to work in a war zone. However, that didn't, help to save their lives. And my fear is that, some of like major international media, and especially considering these two were Americans, so somehow like a lot of people follow what Americans do. So my fear is that, it might discourage other media from sending their journalists to cover this war, which would be a really big problem, and a huge loss, because as I said, sometimes it's only thanks to journalists that we are getting truthful information and can compare, what is really happening with all the disinformation and all the fakes that are coming, especially from the Russian side. And also what I want to note is that we are already seeing that Russia is using a lot of its disinformation actors on the ground. So in addition to Russian propagandists and so-called, journalists who were working back in 2014, 2015 in Donbass, like people coming from Russian state media, they are back again in Ukraine, of course, covering, on the areas that are currently temporarily under Russian control. We are also seeing that there are some representatives of Chinese state media working on the territories that are currently under Russian control and are making basically an apology of Russia's actions. So they are not only covering, on the territories that are controlled by Russia, but they are endorsing, in a way, trying to justify Russia's actions, which I think is quite remarkable, because Chinese propaganda is very often learning from what Russia propaganda is doing. So we should be really following, how Chinese state media cover this conflict and what their journalists are currently doing in Ukraine. And also Russia is bringing its assets in the West to cover this war, to spread disinformation. An infamous British UK national, Graham Phillips, was covering, producing fakes and lies about the war in Ukraine since 2014, is back. He's posting selfies on social media. He's posting, his photos with the Russian flag and his suitcase with the V and Z signs, which are signs of Russian occupying forces. So, Russia is conducting this propaganda and disinformation war on so many levels, targeting different audiences and engaging also by Chinese media and by its assets in the West.
Thank you, Olga. Olena, regarding disinformation, fact-checking and disinformation, do you think that combating efforts are successful? And how are the big IT companies contributing to that?
Actually, Stop Fake is one of the fact-checking organizations that has partnership with Meta company. So we put some efforts here by rating different fake news on Facebook, Instagram, and other media who trying to put their content to Facebook. And I could say that it is really efficient. And why? Because we see actions of Russia when we start putting our rating on all this lie that they start spreading from the beginning of this invasion. They, for example, like Russia didn't target civil Ukrainians here. And now they just close Facebook for Russians and close Instagram and YouTube as well, as I'm not wrong. And just allow for Russians access to all these social networks that where all this propaganda could spread. So these efforts are really efficient when we could provide people with fact checks and explain them why this information is wrong. And this example of this partnership is actually prove this.
We had the opportunity to work with Stop Fakes, and they have been invited to Media Literacy Week training program that we have done, and your work is fantastic.
Thank you.
Roman, do you think that in comparison with before the invasion, disinformation tactics intensified and changed, and if yes or no, in what way?
That's another great question. I would say that they started amplifying different narratives, like that Ukraine is hostile and that is about to attack temporarily occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts and Crimea. So they tried to portray Ukraine as an aggressor. So that actually kind of continued after the invasion on February 24th. But now they started creating even more crazier explanations of why it happened. Like the reason biological weapons that Ukraine started to create to attack Russia, it's the narrative that is like at least 7 years old, where like multiple times debunked by many fact-checking organizations, EU versus Disinfo, Stop Fake, and many others, us included. So I would say that they kind of tried to intensify, and I would actually maybe repeat myself, but the new thing that started being more evident and slightly surprising for a lot of people is that how they weaponized debunking, right? So it was before, but the extent of it was extremely small. When a spokesperson of Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, like Zakharova, started this initiative, putting on some news the red stamp with the word fake, and thought that it was enough of a debunk. Now they launched the whole initiative that is mainly amplified by Russian state actors and embassies elsewhere, and RT specifically, that actually creates fake debunks, right? So that's somewhat different. The extent changed. They scaled it extremely. There's like multiple false debunks per day, and fact checkers cannot keep up with it because it needs more time to debunk something, to debunk the fake, and it takes much more time than to create it, and that's the thing. So I would say that some patterns are relatively the same, the usage of old narratives and reinforcing them again and again, but some things has changed, and specifically a scale of some things like false debunks.
Yes, thank you, Roman. Olga, in relation with President Zelensky campaign, why do you think that it has been so effective? And did it manage to mobilize public support for Ukrainians' case?
Are we talking about his behavior since the invasion started?
Yes, and the use of social media and the use of apps, etc., as a public diplomacy.
Yes, well, President Zelensky is really efficiently using the communication tools that he has at his disposal. And I think the most remarkable thing that, is happening in the communication between Ukrainian officials and the people is that this communication is very regular. So he's making regular video addresses to Ukrainians several times a day. He's shooting videos in his office in the center of Kyiv. He's going to the hospital to visit wounded soldiers. So he's showing that he's with his people. And that's why I think we are seeing now, if we're looking at the polls, such a huge support to his presidency and to his actions. About 90% of Ukrainians support what he's doing and, endorse his policy. It really feels as if he has united the nation and, is doing all the right things that he has to do. Also in his communication, I think what is really remarkable is that he's trying to speak to different audiences. Well, first of all, that is, of course, the audience inside Ukraine, Ukrainian people. He's trying to keep the spirits up and, to communicate very transparently what is happening, very directly. Explaining the situation and also, providing much needed like encouragement and a sense of hope and belief and determination and courage that Ukraine will triumph in this war, to win this war. At the same time, he's very often addressing Russian audience. He's switching to Russian and he's speaking, sometimes addressing Russian soldiers. He's saying that, what are you fighting for here in Ukraine? Are you fighting for Putin? Like, give up your weapons, surrender, we will treat you well. You don't have to, kill Ukrainians. It doesn't make any sense. He's also addressing the mothers of the Russian soldiers. He addresses the Russian public, calling on them to rise up to protest the actions of the Russian government in this terrible war. And he's also pretty efficient in his communication with the Western audience. It's quite different the way he communicates with Ukrainians and with the West. With the West, he's been criticized quite often before the war, and especially in the US. I know it from my sources in the United States that, the Biden administration was sometimes very unhappy that Zelensky was so direct and sometimes like really critical of the US. But now what he was criticized for before is being admired and in fact praised, because, he's saying like very directly and very sincerely that, okay, we thank you for your support, and your assistance you sent to Ukraine, but this is not enough because it is not stopping Putin. We are seeing that he's continuing to give orders to bomb peaceful Ukrainian civilians, pregnant women, children. So you should do more. You should send more weapons to Ukraine. You should provide Ukraine with air defense systems. You should sanction Russia more, imposing embargoes on trade, on oil and gas sectors. Like there is a wide range of, measures that the West has not taken yet. And I think that's also being like quite appreciated. I don't know how much in the West, but inside Ukraine, definitely, because he's voicing what Ukrainian people think, and the people here, yes, they are resilient, they are courageous, they are defiant, but at the same time, they are kind of frustrated, with the fact that the West is not doing enough. And it does not seem to realize that the threat now is not just to Ukraine, but this is a threat to not just Europe's, but the global security.
Mm-hmm. We are here though in order to show that we are doing, or we are trying, and we are doing our best in order to join efforts, in order to push this fight. And this is why we have actually inviting all the people that are here in the webinar to support the efforts that all this community is doing, both Olga, Roman, and Olena, in order to voice up and support their struggle. Olena, do you think that fighting disinformation has changed now that both IT companies and social media providers have changed their tactics, or even that Russia Today and Sputnik has been banned from the European Union?
Yes, I think that all these measures are really effective. And for example, not speaking about IT companies, but for example, speaking of Ukraine, I could say that we are not the same as we were in 2014. And we teach our lessons and working with media literacy, for example, and working with all these disinformation narratives that Russian propaganda is spreading about Ukraine all these years. So, for example, we now see how all these efforts to bring this so-called Russian peace to Ukraine just have no point. And people just didn't buy all these measures, and sometimes it just looking really ridiculous when they trying to just turn off Ukrainian TV and starting just airing Russian TV, and they really think that people will buy it, but they didn't buy it. I think all these measures that were and IT companies and our government and our civil society were doing for all these years, they really paying off now, and we saw how everything what we were doing is really important in this information war.
Thank you. Now, as we reached our time limit, I would like to ask the participants if they have a question that they would like to address to our speakers. And I would like two things: a last word from our speakers, and one last word from our speakers. And then I would like all of you to applause or to support our cause. Roman, a final word.
Yeah, thank you. So I would say that we will see even more false messages and disinformation out there coming from Russian sources. We should always employ critical thinking towards whatever we are seeing, because there will be even more messages. The fact checkers will have even more work to do, and journalists and people who are seeking what is really happening will need to employ more efforts into this affair. So I guess there were many different tactics that Kremlin and informational sources employed during this invasion and before. Some of them are old as a day, some of them might be slightly newer, but most of them are pretty easily might be debunked or discerned if you have time. So I would just urge all people to be critical towards any piece of information that they encounter online, and not to believe something immediately just because it seems plausible. Again, our minds are intertwined to believe everything that aligns with our views. So I would basically ask people and like our listeners and basically everybody to critically analyzing whatever they are facing out there. And thank you for having me.
No, thank you, Roman, for being here with us. Olga?
you know, we've been 20 days in this war, and we've already seen a lot of danger to journalists and a lot of disinformation. And I think while in the first week of war, there was a kind of like more clarity about what is happening, and somehow the efforts of disinformation actors did not gain enough steam, but now they are, you know, in full swing again. And besides the things that I mentioned before, you know, Chinese propaganda helping Russian propaganda, Western propagandists helping Russian propaganda, we are also seeing the emergence of this, you know, very old Russian narratives, fake narratives about Ukraine, such as some like biological laboratories present in Ukraine. So Russia is recycling the narratives that it used for such a long time about Ukraine. Only that these narratives and you know, this kind of tactics were not in the spotlight of the world before. So for us, like who study disinformation, who, you know, analyze these narratives, we are familiar with them, and because Russia has been using them at least for the last 8 years. But I think what is happening now is that many people across the world are kind of discovering this massive scale of propaganda and disinformation that Russia is conducting. So my hope is that, you know, at least like one, if I may say so, positive outcome of this war for the world, like globally, with information, how it is conducted with, you know, different means on different levels. And the bigger attention paid to it, and also the action taken both by social media giants, but also by the governments and the media, the awareness in the media themselves that, you know, how disinformation works, that there should be specialists studying it inside the media. I firmly believe that it is the case, and some media already established some special disinformation units, like the BBC. They have a special disinformation reporters. There was just a department, and now there are several reporters inside the BBC who are analyzing and investigating how disinformation works. So I hope, you know, there is more awareness about the danger of propaganda and disinformation, and there is more willingness and also more availability of funding and people, you know, in order to combat it, because that's a real threat to democracies across the world.
Yes, we agree. And this is what we're doing, and we would be more than happy to continue this discussion, actually, to establish this cooperation. Olena?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to add, I agree with my colleagues, and I want to add that this war shows that Russia has no boundaries, that this country didn't understand any diplomatic language, any like law whatsoever. And that this country is using disinformation as a really strong weapon, and not only against Ukraine, but against the whole world. And we now saw, like in Russian different propaganda programs, they discussing how after Ukraine they will invade Baltic countries and so on. And I just want to say that teach lesson after Ukraine, and don't call Russian media as media, don't call Russian journalists as journalists. You have to understand that it just as really effective weapon in their arms. And we have to treat them just as a weapon, but not as a source of information. And disinformation really kills. So it's
yes. Thank you, Elena. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It was really, we are thankful for being here with us, especially under these conditions. We want action, and I would like everyone to stand and thank our speakers for taking this step and being with us today and under these conditions. We are more than grateful for being with us. Digital Communication Network Global wanted and will continue to show the support of our global community to your cause. We have done that with various initiatives and measures, and we are doing with the aim actually to support your struggle. Digital Communication Network has been supported from Citizen Exchanges Office, whom we would like to thank, and also we are implementing the campaign Humans for Ukraine. The campaign takes place all over Europe with the aim actually to mobilize public opinion and to give voices to those people that are not heard. But among the people that are working towards this direction are people like Olena, like Olga and Roman. We would like to thank you very much for your struggle, and we will continue to be with you. Thank you very much for today.